I'm Kathryn Welch and I'm here with Ailie Robertson, who's composing and playing a new work for the Scottish Ensemble Tour in May 2022. We're here to introduce Scottish Creations, storytelling through art and music, a partnership between Scottish Ensemble and Creative Lives to celebrate Scotland's Year of Stories.
I'm going to begin by playing a piece called Lady Gethin, written by a harpist and composer from the 18th century called Turlough O'Carolan. So the next piece that I'm going to play is a piece that I wrote called 10,000 Days and Nights I Will Wait For You.
Thank you so much,
Pleasure.
Ailie. That's really beautiful and completely mesmerising. I'm really lucky to sit next to you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So, for Scottish Creations, we're inviting people, members of the public, to be part of creating a pop-up exhibition that's going to tour with your work and with the Scottish Ensemble next year. So thinking, I guess, especially about pieces like this last one that you've composed and created yourself, it would be lovely to hear how you get inspiration, or maybe where you get inspiration for creating that kind of pieces. So perhaps other people can think about where they might find inspiration for creating something as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me it can come from so many different places and different things. It really very much depends on the context. That particular piece was part of a suite. I was commissioned to write a suite of music all about whiskey making and the Scottish whiskey industry. And one of the interesting, I spent about 6 months writing this piece, and a lot of it was spent travelling to different distilleries around Scotland.
It's a tough job, isn't it?
A very tough job. Someone has to do it. And talking to the local craftspeople there, and you know, whiskey making is very much a craft, and it's very much handed down from kind of generation to generation, with this real emphasis on keeping things to the traditional ways. And so I guess I started to feel these real parallels with traditional music and the way that we hand that down from generation to generation and try to kind of preserve it for the next generation. And the other thing that really struck me as I kind of went on this journey was how much waiting is involved with making whiskey. Like, of course, you kind of do all the distilling, and then you have to wait like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, like such long periods of time. And, you know, we're so used to having everything immediately. And so, again, I sort of saw this parallel between that industry, and in Scottish music we have so many songs about waiting. They're almost always written by women, and they're waiting for men to come back from war or from sea or from wherever it might be. So there's this, we have many songs about waiting. So there was these kind of nice parallels that I started to discover, which I never thought would exist. And I guess the inspiration for that piece, the title is 10,000 Days and Nights I Will Wait For You. And 10,000 days is approximately how long it would take to write to make a 30-year-old whiskey.
Wow.
But also said, you know, you always hear sort of, I would wait 10,000 years for you in songs, and so it seems like this nice parallel.
Yeah, that's fascinating and interesting. We were talking earlier about getting inspiration from nature and the environment, and that process of things that just take time. You know, they're not rushing element of things that are outside the kind of day-to-day experience, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thinking about you kind of going out, having all these experiences, having all these conversations with people, it feels a bit like stories are everywhere and potential inspiration is everywhere. And sometimes that can be a great thing, and sometimes that can be overwhelming. You know, if you can write about anything, where do you start? So I guess what makes a good story? How does something turn in your mind from just being a good story or an interesting tale into something that strikes you as saying, but this is the one that I want to make music about?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think for me it's normally that it has some sort of emotional hook in it. In some way it engages your emotions, whether that's that it's really exciting or it's really scary or it's really heartfelt or whatever it might be. I think it's that. I think that those are the stories that really capture people's imaginations, when there's something that has a very strong kind of emotional connection for people in some way that kind of keeps them wanting to hear the next bit and allows them to really invest in the characters. I think that's a big part of it as well. Like when you feel like there's something in a character that you can identify with, or in a story, even if it's more abstract than that, that there's something that you can see yourself in or see something about your life in. I think that really helps.
So something that goes beyond just that's interesting into that makes me feel positive
absolutely.
or negative, I think, from, you know, it can make me feel happy or joyful or loving, but also maybe something that makes me feel angry or upset or furious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people get, not me, but people get such joy watching horror movies, for instance. And there's something about that, like being on the edge of your seat and totally scared. And for some reason, people really love that. But there's something about that. Yeah, I think it's that sort of visceral connection, because I think that's, whether it's a happy or a sad story, there's always that like little goosebumps moment that you get. And that's the bit where you kind of know that something magical is happening.
Yes. And so for you tonight, you've played us a piece of your own composition. So you've created it and you've played it for us.
Yeah.
And I wonder about the opposite of that experience. I wonder what it's like to set your creations out into the world, either to be played by somebody else or just to be heard and enjoyed by people that you can't necessarily control. And again, that's, I think, similar to this Scottish Creations project, in that people will be making something for the exhibition and then sending it out into the world, kind of letting go of it to some extent. And I wondered what that's like for you when you've poured a lot of yourself and a lot of your emotional self sometimes into a piece, what it is then to set it free.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a lovely bit to it and there's a terrifying bit to it. So the lovely bit is definitely that just feeling like you're kind of handing on that material and hearing other people bring it to life or see their interpretations, whether it's that somebody else is simply playing it and just getting to see an audience reaction and seeing whether they react the way that you think they will. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they react in ways that are totally unexpected and they find something that you weren't expecting them to find, and that's lovely. So that part's really nice. It's like you almost discover your own work with fresh eyes again, I think, and through the eyes of whoever's playing it or who's listening to it, so that's lovely. But I mean, there's definitely a terrifying element. I don't think I've ever not been absolutely terrified handing over a score and then having it be performed and just waiting to hear what people will see or make of it, and yeah, that will never stop being terrifying. And but it's also like, it's so exciting and it's so lovely to think about my work being played alongside the works from everybody else who contributes to this project. I think there's something so nice about that sort of collective creative energy altogether that's a really great thing.
And if you think then that if there are people who are thinking about getting involved but just thinking, for me the scared or the nervous is it outweighs the excitement, do you have any advice for that kind of feeling? Is it just a case of just take the plunge and put it out there, or how do you know you've gotten to that point where it's ready to go?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, with the nerves, I think that it's one of those things where the only way to get over them is just to actually start creating. And I think that the worst part is always the start. Like for me, a blank page is terrifying and I procrastinate like crazy at the start of writing anything. And then once you get going, that's when the really fun part starts. So I'd say to anyone who's kind of thinking about it, just start doing it. And then if you, I hope then you'll discover that it's really enjoyable and you'll get more and more into it the further along you go. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the main thing I would say, just start.
Enjoy the process.
Yeah, exactly. Like at the end of the day, art should be really enjoyable, and although it's scary and although there's a kind of terrifying element to it, at the end of it, like, it should be something that's really enjoyable and that you should feel like you're kind of, I think especially if you think within this project, like, nobody's going to worry about your thing in the same way that you do. You know, everyone else is just going to look at it and be like, oh, that's so lovely, look at all that craftsmanship. Yeah. And nobody else will see the kind of tiny flaws that you wish you'd changed and things like that.
And even if they do, sometimes they're the thing that makes it precious and interesting and beautiful and handmade.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, it's been such a treat to share a stage with you this evening. Thank you. If you would like to follow the Scottish Creations project or to get involved, then just head over to www.creative-lives.org.